friends, welcome to the Geek Girl Story Salon, where I talk to creatives from across disciplines and across the world about the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone, lifelong storyteller and head geek in charge. We've got some great guests coming up, like Cullen Bunn, writer of the Harrow County Comics, and author Leah Elson, so be sure to smash that like and subscribe button to stay up to date on the heaping helpings of brain food coming your way, courtesy of our partners fleetoffandoms.com and Ilva Publishing, an independent publisher for women's fiction. My guest today is a documentary filmmaker, a dancer, and an important series regular in a female-centric TV series with an absolutely feral cult following, which you may have heard of, known as Motherland Fort Salem. It's a little-known fact that his picture actually appears in the dictionary next to positive non-toxic masculinity. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the series of documentary shorts he made about the struggles of navigating Western culture with a non-Western name called My Name Is. And of course, so that you all don't egg my house, we will talk about his work as Adil in Motherland Fort Salem. Welcome to the salon, Tony Giroux.
Thanks so much, Jen. Wow, what an intro. Very flattered. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being here. I am actually hoping that Jess is going to join us at some point for the show. So
Fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. Well, thanks for sitting down with me. I kind of randomly approached you, and but the entire purpose of starting the show was to talk to people who were doing interesting things and doing them at a really high level. And I watched your documentary and I loved it. It's interesting to me that you made this documentary about names, because while I haven't obviously had the experience of trying to navigate a Western culture with a non-Western name, we all do have so much more wrapped up in our names than we really even consciously think about. I think women have to think about it more than most men do. For example, do we change our names when we marry, and why or why not?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like one of the questions that your film asks is, what are we trying to present to the world when we make those choices? What is the story that our names tell about us as we move through the world? So I would like, if you don't mind, to ask, what are you choosing to say with the choices you've made with your own name?
Oh, great question. I think it's interesting from myself, I think I really didn't put into perspective until I did the documentary. And falling upon that story and following through with it and making the documentary really made me reflect upon what does it mean to me to have the name Tony, to have my middle name that's Chinese that I didn't use for a while, and my last name that's French, Giroux. And I always knew that my mother named me after one of her best friends, but she also wanted something international. And when I started reflecting upon my name and the story that came with that, I realized that each part of my name, of my full name, represents kind of different parts of my identity. And the part where she said, my mother said, oh, she wants something international, the name Tony, which I think really in so many ways has been a name that fits everywhere, that has a lot of cultural references in many different places. There's Tony the Tiger, there's Tony Montana. And so when I was younger, it very much was, a name that people recognized right away. And then it was interesting then with my last name, Giroux, it's when I moved to Canada in my teens, it was very much a commodity. But then, with having a name that is different, whether that's exciting or not, then usually people want to know the story behind it, or how do you pronounce it, blah, blah, blah. And I think it can be a great conversation starter, or when people show interest. But then it can also sometimes be a separator in a way that can be either seen as delightful or sometimes continuously having to justify some of your heritage and whatnot. But for me, it's always been quite positive. And then recently, also doing the documentary, I really reflected upon my Chinese middle name that I had, and it's on my identification. But I never, I think, openly really used it until recently, and until, I think in this time doing the documentary, but then also, I think it's a time of really celebrating diversity and inclusion, and I thought, what a great time for me to embrace those parts of myself.
Mhm.
And I've been connected to my Chinese culture in a lot of different ways throughout my entire life, but it made me reflect on how much did I openly embrace that, in the world that's out there. So that's kind of my story with
Okay.
my full name, Tony Hiu Joong Giroux.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting because when you have a name that is unfamiliar, it makes things a little difficult navigating through the world. And your series talks about that a little bit. Again, I don't relate to it. It hits in a different way for me, because my married name Jacqueline is very hard for people. Like they see G's and they see vowels, and they don't quite know what to do with it. And that wasn't really an improvement from my maiden name, which was Polish and had a lot of consonants.
Okay.
So, like there was a period of my young life in New York when, I was working in sales. It was a brief, unfortunate period, but I did have, I did take on a more waspy, fake surname when I was doing it, because I just didn't want to deal with having to sit and explain or respell or correct people's pronunciations, because it derails a conversation.
Mm, mhm.
So it was interesting to watch something that wasn't really, I guess, aimed at me per se, and be able to relate to it, in such a, it hit differently, but it did hit.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, and it always creates that. You, you, I see it. I'd like to see it, as an opportunity, but sometimes it is just a difficulty of being an immigrant and trying to conform to a local norm. And I don't even know how hard it must have been for you, but every time saying, "Oh, how do you spell that?" or "How do you pronounce that?" for even for anything formal, anything more administrative,
Mm,
and that's an extra hurdle that you're having to go through. But then I think it also speaks at the natural sense of society where, in a way, we like to find familiarity. But then, to me, the documentary is about how is it that we find diversity within community, and it is difficult to some level. It is going through these hurdles of, okay, like you bring something different to the table that I'm not familiar with. Let me try and learn and navigate through that whilst I'm navigating through a thousand things in my
right,
personal life.
right.
But hopefully, I can find also a bit of time and effort to make you feel welcomed amidst the differences.
Mhm. Um, yeah, one of the things that I liked, um, about the series was the tone is very gentle, and it's
Mm.
very contemplative, and it just, um, because I've actually been watching a lot of documentaries lately for whatever reason, but a lot of them kind of serve you the thing you're supposed to come away with, and you don't do that. You kind of take us and, very gently sort of lead us through the different experiences that your different subjects have had, dealing with their names. Um, and it feels like a very conscious choice that you don't have anyone actually talk about their experiences in terms of colonization until that final episode.
Mm.
Was that a deliberate choice to kind of bring people along before you threw the C word out there? Because I feel like people get very defensive when they hear that word sometimes, and they tense up.
Mm. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I don't know that it was a deliberate. I think it was a deliberate choice to have Javeri's episode in the end. In terms of, I felt like it was a nice button to end on,
Mhm.
and I think it in terms of emotional weight,
Mm.
her story, I know, was had a lot of it.
Mhm.
And in her, really considering to change, having changed her name and wanting to change her name back, to me, it felt a nice way to bring that series to an end.
Mhm.
But yeah, and I think in a way, it's an to come to the aspect of colonization, or because she has a PhD, and so she's a doctor and does a lot of work in that realm. I thought it was a nice way to bring the more academic
Mhm.
aspect of the topic as well after we've heard people's stories. Because
Mhm.
to me, what's always most important is to translate people's stories first
Mhm.
before we put on concepts, before we try and think, oh, is this right or wrong, and what's my opinion on what they're saying.
Mhm.
I really wanted to humanize their stories,
Mhm.
and for us to get to know them at an individual level, regardless of the fact that that they have immigrant names or non-Western names.
Mhm.
And so for Javeria as well, I think I tried to really bring out her story first, and then she very much dives into these important topics that I think also are a nice button to finish upon for us to reflect on,
Mhm.
and just to notice, oh, what concepts, or what is that work in the society that I live in, and do I
Mhm.
agree with that or not?
Mhm.
Do I feel like there's aspects of, are we in the post-colonial era? Yes, because of this, or no, actually, I disagree. I feel like we're quite progressive. And I think that is up for the viewer to consider, that
Mhm.
everyone may have different perspectives, and that's totally okay. And I think her having a strong perspective allows us to reflect on that ourselves.
Mhm. Now you're living where? You're in Vancouver or?
Yeah, Vancouver,
Yeah,
Canada right now.
cool. And you went to school in London, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
And that's
Do
why the
you,
project emerged.
yeah. Do you find it any difference between here and there in terms of the ways that you have to sort of iron things out when you're navigating the culture, just in the day to day? Like, do you find like Vancouver, you find it easier to use your full name, or do you get fewer questions or more questions, or is it about the same?
Mm. Well, I think it's interesting because for myself and being French,
Mm.
and when I spent time in the UK,
Mhm.
it's a neighbor, and so there's a familiarity with that. I think when it comes to my Chinese identity, I very
Mhm.
much do feel a lot more that it's easy, maybe not necessarily easier, but it's a lot more familiar to people here.
Mm.
I think on the west coast of North America, there's been a huge amount of Asian immigrants,
Mm.
or Asian immigration,
Mhm.
uh, and it's very much becoming, I think, part of the mainstream narrative now, talking about Asian
Mhm.
culture. Um, Canada, especially, I think, prides itself in being progressive, in
Mhm.
diversity, in inclusion.
Mhm.
And so here, yeah, it is very much, I think the conversation very easily lends itself to what is my heritage, what is my parents' stories, and even being of mixed heritage, oh, there's an interest to know, oh, how did your two parents meet?
Mhm.
And what are those two parts of you?
Mhm.
Uh, that I think in Europe, perhaps there's less of a conversation around that.
Interesting.
So, so I noticed that when having talk conversations about my identity over there, it's perhaps less present.
Hmm. Do you do you do you enjoy having those conversations, or is it just, I mean, in your day to day, does it create friction for you?
No, I think I've come to a time in my life where I'm, really open to exploring that part of me,
Mhm.
and feeling comfortable with those questions.
Mhm.
Um, that I think I've answered some when it comes to what it means to me to be of mixed heritage,
Mhm.
and so I'm very open to talking about it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's But then I think in the pace of this society, it's harder sometimes to find the time to really have in-depth conversation. So it's very different to have a sit-down conversation where somebody's interested in your story
Mm-hmm.
versus just, for a while there was that question of, oh, what are you?
Mm-hmm.
Which I to me was just a shortcut for them, for their curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't have as much grace as we do now, I
Right.
think. So it never really bothered me, but it did sometimes make me feel, a bit dehumanized,
Sure.
which I think is an aspect of also of human interaction, that sometimes we see an aspect of that we like, and we're very curious about it, and we don't
Mhm.
think about,
How it
how
comes.
is that person feeling,
Right.
what's going on in their
Right.
day and
Right.
whatnot. And I think, to me, I was never really upset about that, but I
Yeah.
just noticed that it became a part of the conversation early on about me being mixed heritage, and people talking about, oh, the "what are you" question, which I related to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's sort of its own experience, right? Like being mixed, because you maybe like people see it like, how do people view it, like, or what misconceptions do they have about what it means, as opposed to if you were just purely 100% Chinese on both sides of your
Mm.
family, like, do you find people respond to you differently, or have confused expectations sometimes about what that means?
Well, I think a lot of times from the outside, we it's seen as, there's very much, people see the positive aspects of, oh, it's, you have two cultures. It is, and for whilst, and I think it still is, that they're kind of considered, like a hot commodity, or they say, mixed babies are so attractive, all this, which, it's always very flattering, but I think we never talk about or it's harder to talk about the difficulties when it comes to identity,
Mm,
and that for some people with mixed heritage, it's very grounding from the start. But I think for me, there was always questions around, well, where do I belong?
mm,
And feeling like I belong neither in France,
mm,
I don't fully belong in Canada, I don't belong as a Chinese individual. So it took me a very long time to reconciliate different parts of me and to realize, and I think I'm only starting to feel like, okay, Tony is an amalgamation of a lot of different aspects, different cultures, different experiences. But for a while, there is that aspect of kind of feeling like I fit everywhere, kind of like
mm,
my name Tony, and my mother wanting
mm,
for it to be international,
mm.
but yet there isn't you know a clear nucleus of saying, oh well, I'm French,
Right.
and that's my
Right.
identity. Because a lot of my friends in France, and the French being a very patriotic country, I feel
Mm,
like they have such a strong sense of who they are,
mm,
of what their values are, and
mm,
'cause I think who aspects of our belonging, I think, come to the land that we come from,
mm.
or our families, and when that isn't clear, it takes, for me at least, it's been a journey to figure that out.
So, like, you fit a lot of places, but don't necessarily feel fully embraced necessarily.
I think in the past,
Yeah.
definitely. I think, or sometimes I put I yearned for that. I yearned
Mm,
for that belonging,
mm.
and so for me, just being seen as, oh, you're a halfer, it's so cool, and this, and there was a disconnect,
Yeah.
uh, and so it would be nice sometimes if I met somebody else of mixed heritage,
Mm,
and we can just sometimes skip that conversation, and it's just an understanding. Oh,
mm,
we're of a lot of different cultures, and there's that feeling of not really fitting in, yet
mm,
fitting in everywhere. And that's been part of my narrative.
mm. That's, yeah, it's interesting because, like, I mean, in a different way, from a different perspective, I find that very relatable.
Mm,
My mom went through a lot of different religions when I was growing up, and
okay. Yeah.
so I got a taste of all of them. And I don't really belong to any particular religious
Mm-hmm.
thing now, but at the same time, I have, a kind of affection and respect for all of them, and I can talk with people about them, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so it's very interesting. Again, like the ways that you frame this whole story, I think are both specific to you, but I think probably relatable to a lot of people.
Okay.
Um, so I know this from talking to a few documentary makers, that sometimes the thing you're making can take a left turn while you're shooting. Um, did My Name Is turn out more or less how you envisioned it, or were there some surprises?
Well, it being I've I've made small projects before
Mm,
when it comes to filming, when
mm,
it comes to videography. I was being a dancer before. I loved
mhm,
filming dance,
mm,
and I went into My Name Is, I think, very green,
mm,
and it was a one man project.
mhm,
I had Javeria, who was the principal investigator, but so dealt with a lot of the academical side, the aspects of the budget. And
mhm,
so when I was on set, it was just me taking care of, camera, sound,
mm,
trying to do different setups and being newer.
mm,
I think I was sweating a little bit. And then I would, check the sound and I'd be like, okay, yeah, go ahead, talk. And then I would put it down,
mhm.
check the camera, and
Oof.
then I'd say, all right, now let's try to have a meaningful conversation.
Mhm,
So it was, I think, yeah, it was very challenging, but nothing too overwhelming. I think it more so came to when it comes to the editing,
mhm,
how is it that you go about telling a message that is meaningful to me as a director,
mhm.
yet also honoring each people's voices. And I wonder if that's from a documentary filmmaker's perspective, if that's always a personal questioning of, okay, how is it that I honor both these people's stories, but yet
Mhm.
also tell the message that I care to tell.
Yeah,
And so for me, so the editing was took a long time, and to think of, okay, what, because it would have been very easy for each story to kind of have the same message, but how is it that I could lean into, oh, this aspect of this person's story is fits into the whole narrative that I'm wanting to put forth.
yeah,
So that I hope, and I've had conversations with each of them, but I really hope that they felt that their story was honored and respected.
yeah. I mean, again, as somebody who's outside of the groups that are being spoken to in this, it felt to me very, very respected or respectful. But I liked how you broke it into the sections, and each one sort of, covered a different angle on that overall narrative.
Mm.
I was, when I was listening to you sort of talk about it just now, I thought of Michelangelo, who, I've probably forgotten more about him than most people bother to learn. But when he talked about his sculpture, um, his approach was to chisel away everything that wasn't the statue.
Mm.
It's like a very famous quote of his. And as you were describing the process of editing and kind of teasing out what the story is, I sort of thought of that.
Mm, Yeah, no, that's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
Because so easily each interview was between 30 minutes to an hour and a half,
Mm,
and the idea of, okay, how is it that, and a friend of mine who was a documentary filmmaker said he always said to, what, shoot for way shorter. He says, I know you have lots of footage,
mm,
always try and trim and trim and trim,
mm, mm.
um, which feels, heart wrenching when you care about the people's stories in a way
Ah,
that you feel like each person's story could be its own documentary.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I love that analogy of trying to chip away and ultimately what benefits the message that you want to tell.
Yeah. Now I've also watched Mr. Accident.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is it's that little short piece that's on your Instagram.
Yeah.
Does it live anywhere else other than that, or was that something you just kind of made and put up?
Totally just made and put up.
Wow. Okay. Um, I loved it because it feels very kind of in line with My Name Is, tonally, and also the ways in which it's addressing the subject of conformity, which feels like a big thread in My Name Is. And it even takes a poke at capitalism, which I love. Um, do you ever feel like you want to address these subjects in a fictional setting, or do you prefer the immediacy of the documentary format? Like, would you ever want to do something like a feature about those themes?
100%.
Oh yeah.
And those are themes that that really speak to me. I think at a conscious level and also unconscious level, because it's sometimes these are stories that I care to talk about and share with the world. And and whether it's something well thought out like the documentary or the Mr. Accident, which was very much on a whim, when sometimes I like beautiful footage, and I remember I volunteer out on this farm, and on my way to it I always saw this field, and I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. And one day I just stopped and filmed some footage in it, and then I started thinking, oh, what kind of music can I put on? And then I started thinking, oh, what is the story I'd like to share? And it kind of flowed out of me in a natural way. And to me, usually something that flows out naturally, to me, it just resonates at a deep level. The aspect of conforming, the aspect of like you said, capitalism. And I think capitalism in lots of ways, dehumanizing us. There's ways that I understand its benefits, but it's definitely something that speaks to me. And the idea of conformity, both at the external level of within a society, but then also within myself, I've always felt like I've had to conform to definitions of what it meant to be, to be a mixed heritage, to be a man, to these different elements that I felt I had to identify with in terms of, or being a good son, a good partner, all these aspects that I felt were more imprisoning than freeing. So it's, to me, that's an ongoing conversation with myself of conformity versus authenticity, which I wonder if we all face to some level, because I think as soon as we have a community of which is more than one person, like even this conversation, we have to find a space in between where we can meet. That if I'm just fully authentic and doing my own thing, then sometimes there's no way for you to relate or for us to connect. But then if I'm fully conforming to only, okay, so what is it that Jen wants to hear from me, then I'm not being fully myself. And so I think to me it's a constant dance where ideally there's the mutual compromise where that becomes its new entity. And I think to me that can actually be very exciting. Because when you connect and you have, meaningful conversations, that's the basis of connection. And I think we need that in so many different ways. But sometimes it's hard to, what can feel like sacrificing aspects of ourselves, sacrificing our authenticity. But it's a theme that I absolutely love. And I would love to bring it in different aspects of my work, for sure.
So a lot of these themes that you're touching on, like the identity and culture and conformity, actually really line up very well with your work as Adil in Motherland. So Uh, I mean, it is probably the work you're best known for, but did you feel like there was a synergy between who you are as a person and the themes that are so important to his character?
At first I didn't realize it.
Huh.
Um, and then when I started looking in hindsight, maybe I can't remember if it was after the first or second season, and I started realizing, and then also understanding sometimes casting in a different light. The idea of understanding sometimes, great. I had done some classes where it said, "Oh, great, a great film. Sometimes it's just based on great casting and that person just embodying a certain energy." And and I looked back on the story of Motherland for Salem and where Adil came in, and I thought, "Oh yeah, this is very fitting in a way that." Um, Somebody who I related a lot to this character naturally, especially even just in terms of the circumstances of I was living in London at the time and coming into a production that's already established, and I very much felt like a kind of a new foreigner on the premises, and I think that naturally colored the performance with real life circumstances. Um, and so I think, yeah, his story definitely spoke to me, and in a lot of different ways too. Of myself also having immigrated in my teens, um, and having lots of questions around his own identity. It definitely resonated, uh, both I think consciously and unconsciously at the time.
Mm. Yeah, it was just interesting because when I started like looking at the films and at the stuff on your Instagram, it just felt like, oh, it feels like there's a unified theory here.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
um, what did you like most about his story?
Mm. I think what I was maybe most, what I was most touched by is, I think, him and his sister's resilience, and I think the fight to hold on to his personal values, and that I think we, especially in the second season, and kind of what I talked about earlier around the conformity versus authenticity, and I think that Adil's story really lied in an interesting place where, having been what I would consider closer to a refugee, where he had lost, where his traditions are lost. The land that he lived on and that his ancestors lived on, wasn't present anymore. His ancestors are all gone, and so it's a real question of, if I want to build a new family, I have to surrender aspects of myself, and that to me was really touching. That the second season, his story to me really delved into that, and to me, it's a story that all that I think immigrants have to face, and that I see my grandparents, my Chinese grandparents who immigrated in Canada, that what some of the sacrifices they had to make in order to really build a life here. Um, what my mother had to do, she moved from Canada to France for my father in her early 20s, and that was in the 80s as well. So some of the sacrifices she had to make, I think, so to me that was probably an aspect of him that was really touching.
Hmm.
Yet also, coming from a culture that's pacifist, so to try and navigate through it in a way that feels somewhat gentle, even though in a world like Mother Fort Salem, when there is so much chaos, like
Hmm.
how do you go about that? Um, so to me, that was yeah, an aspect that really touched me about his story.
Um, is there anything that you would have liked to have seen more of?
Mm, I think when in hindsight, and I can be sometimes a perfectionist or quite
Mm,
critical of myself. I think it would be there's definitely sometimes I consider, oh, could I could aspects of his story of his rage or of his pain been taken further,
mm,
more on display. Those are, I mean, that's an interesting question that sometimes I I think of, but then I also think, oh, I totally respect the creators for them also
mhm,
trusting them with their vision and what they needed to do. Kind of what I was saying as well, being a documentary filmmaker, and
mm,
what is it that the filmmaker is trying to tell.
mm,
Um, and I think, so I think Adil's narrative was um, very, I would hope, brought a interesting piece to that narrative
mm,
that to me revolved a lot around inclusion, around diversity,
mm.
around trying to celebrate differences in a
Yeah.
in a world that demands conformity.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I was actually kind of astounded at how much ground the series covered in that third season.
Mm,
Um, I think, I speak for probably a lot of the fans when I say we would have loved to have a fourth season and have that story like stretched out a little more. So we got to, because there are so many great characters, Adil being one of them, that it would have been really great to just kind of hang out with a little bit more.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I mean, if there in a world in which there was a fourth season, I would have loved to have them explore his arc a little bit more. Um,
hmm Yeah, perhaps of what it is to really live in a new world, and but then sometimes does the past. I think that the past that is with us always, and I think that's perhaps a constant dance.
yeah.
But yeah, that would have been potentially neat to explore. But
Do you ever imagine what might have happened to him after the end of the story that was given to us?
oh, I think, well, there was a little bit of talks, and there was asked people saying that him and Abigail would have gone
Mm,
to work in the what was it? I mean, what was the government
mm,
aspect of things at a higher level, because
mm,
Abigail's journey really leading up to her becoming her own general, or her own military leader, and
mm,
Adele being kind of on, as her right hand man to help with decision making on whatnot. I think that could have been interesting. The idea of seeing them, take charge and creating a world that has, more diversity. I think that could have been an interesting aspect of how the season 3 ended.
mm,
To say, okay, well, now that this spell has been done on the world, but then how do you maintain that? How do you showcase that and continuously create that lifestyle with love
mm.
and acceptance, which I think is an extremely difficult thing to do. For anybody who's a community leader,
Right.
the idea of trying to build a space where a lot of people feel seen and accepted
Mm,
is extremely difficult. Um, so I think that could have been interesting to dive into.
mm.
The idea of perhaps how do you create and maintain a safe space.
Yeah. Um, I have to say, I really liked his relationship with Abigail. Um, I just, I enjoyed so much the way they kind of grew from, from being together and from knowing each other.
Mm,
Um, I think, I think it was certainly the best. It was certainly the best heterosexual romance on the show.
mm.
Um, but
Thanks.
did how was it working with Ashley? Was that a? It felt like you guys had a good chemistry.
Yeah, I think we had really great chemistry, and I think, off the what I think was what that relationship, what that heterosexual relationship
Mm,
stood for, I think, is I think the traditional ideal of opposites attract,
mm,
and which I wonder if sometimes in today's society, I think we see a little bit less of that. I think there's so much sometimes dating like
mm,
attracts or
mm,
similarities. And what I loved about them is that they have such different values and
mm,
such different ways of navigating the world.
mm,
Um, Yet they find a way to come together and then to make each other stronger because of that. I think Abigail was able to soften up in different ways, and Adil was able to be more assertive in ways that he never would have if he hadn't met Abigail. And I think that relationship also translated with me and with Ashley and myself, so that
mm,
I learned a lot from her,
mm,
and those natural colors that we were able to bring to the characters
mm,
perhaps also really affected us at a personal level.
mm,
And I think that off screen we were able to really have fun with those differences and tease each other a lot, and make it about camaraderie, and then on screen finding some of the more difficult bridges to
mm,
face.
mm.
Uh, but yeah, when it was it was a lot of fun. I have a very special place for Ashley in my heart.
I'm going to admit one thing, which is I did find it rather satisfying when Adil punched that guy who was
Mm,
giving Abigail a hard time. It was like,
the one
all
in the
right,
bar.
in the bar, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was like, okay, I love that he's a pacifist, and I love that that he's okay supporting a strong woman, but that was kind of satisfying for me in a way. It was
Mm,
like, okay, he can get in touch with this aggressive part of himself when he needs to, and
mm, yeah,
you
I think
know,
it was really satisfying for him as well, the way I envisioned it. That I
mm,
think the carnal aspect of us that sometimes wants to meet violence with violence, which
mm,
goes against some of his values, but sometimes it's just what the body wants to do, saying no, like, that's not okay, and then
yeah,
meeting
yeah,
it with physical release.
mm, yeah. And to be clear, I'm not pro-violence, but in fiction, I think sometimes it's a nice way to let that out.
Yeah, I agree, and I think sometimes fiction allows us to ourselves experience the things that aren't okay in regular society. That I would hope that it's sometimes that film and art is a way to release those natural impulses that don't
Mm,
fit in a society that make it actually unsafe.
hmm.
But to have that on screen makes us feel like, oh, and that feels good.
Yeah. Like I occasionally will watch something and someone will complain about something being unrealistic, and sometimes I say, well, but I don't know, I'm not necessarily watching this because I want realistic.
Hmm. I think there's an escapism quality to it,
Yeah.
always, or an expression of things that I don't know that I want to, yell at my
Hmm.
mom or my partner in ways that feels completely offensive. But sometimes seeing it on screen or in theater allows us, I think, to reflect, to feel something, and to reflect on it
Hmm.
without acting out on it.
Yeah. I don't know if you watched the series Killing Eve. Um
No, I haven't.
but yeah, people were very upset about the ending because The two female protagonists, or I guess they were really more an antagonist and protagonist, but they were drawn to each other emotionally, even though they were both kind of trying to like kill each other for most of the series. But like, I wanted them to run off together at the end, and it seemed like they were going to do that, and then they basically killed one of the characters. And that was realistic.
Mm,
Their situation was, they were being chased by super spies and shady cabals and international assassins and whatever. It's absolutely realistic that it ended that way. But I was still mad about it. People said, it's like, no, I want the hopeful ending. I want the story to end, you know, hopeful.
yeah.
I want to envision a better world.
Mm.
And so it can be it can be, it can manifest that way too, I think.
Yeah, no, and I totally hear that, and I think yeah, it's sometimes it's so nice to have the hopeful ending, but then when I think of, let's say, French cinema
Mm,
in general, which tends to lean towards more realism,
mm,
that a lot of times, some of the films that I've loved because they're so realistic.
mm-hmm,
Because a lot of love stories are not the happily ever after.
mm-hmm.
But I think that's so interesting where the filmmaker, the artist, what story they want to say.
Yeah,
But I get that. I hate
yeah.
certain films when the ending
Mm,
is just not
mm,
hopeful. You're
mm.
like, why?
Yeah. And I mean, I think both I think are important. I think there's room in the world for both of those attitudes and approaches.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, sometimes I'm just, I'm not here for things being quite so realistic.
Hmm. Mm. Hmm.
This depends on my headspace, I guess. But um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think that can be
yeah, I mean,
conversation of its
that's a
own.
whole conversation. Um, but in talking to my last serious question, in talking to multidisciplinary artists like yourself and like myself, I find it very interesting to see how each discipline hits a different part of their brain. So I wonder if I can ask, what does acting feed for you versus directing versus dance?
Mm. Um,
I'm not going to say what do you prefer because I know that's ridiculous. But
yeah. No,
what are those things? What different things do those feed in you?
yeah. No. Very good point on film. Or for me, at least, I have a very hard time saying what is my favorite aspect.
Mm,
Because in a lot of ways, I don't think I could live without each.
mm,
Um, well, I think acting lends itself to expressing my emotions in a way that feels free. I think there is that aspect of what I talked about earlier, conformity versus authenticity,
mm,
that I've always loved about acting. This idea of that it is a space for me to be authentic
mm,
in what I feel, and I think that is one of the first aspects that drew me to it when I took an acting class, and I was able to release so much emotion, and a lot of sorrow, a lot of anger,
mm,
and a lot of pain, and it was odd to think, oh wow, this is a space. It's okay for me to feel. I don't have to be whatever definition I have in my mind of a man.
mm,
Um, and acting feeds that part, and it also feeds the part of me that is ever so curious about everything in the world.
mm,
That each role, it also asks an immense amount, I think, of curiosity and empathy towards who the character is, what they're going through,
mm,
regardless of their situation, regardless if it's quote unquote good or quote unquote bad. I
mm,
think it really that's an aspect that I always try and bring forth to the way that I navigate through life, of like always thinking, well, this person is an individual and they've had experiences that led them to this choice. Um, so that's the aspect of acting that I love. With directing,
mm,
it's a great space for control,
mm,
in terms of thinking, oh, what is the shot that I want? and a lot of it being the control aspect of that I refer to is the aspect of what is the vision that I have, and it's so much fun trying to execute that. I mean, with the documentary, it's different because there is so much. I think there's an aspect that is in a relationship so much more because you're dealing with people's real stories. But in general, with directing, there is an aspect of, oh, what if when I've done more fictions or even those small narratives that I've put on Instagram, it's really about, oh, how do I want to carve the story with the shot, with the dialogue, with the music, that is really becomes about, oh, what is the experience that I want to be on and that I want to share with people. And then, that's a lot of fun. And then when it comes to dance, that's just, I think I've been dancing for about, how old am I now? 32, for about, like 16 years. And I think it's an ever expanding relationship with my body of I think always a return to how I feel, and this idea of it makes me deal with myself in a lot of different ways. And even as I get older, there's this idea of, well, I can't do what I used to be able to do when I was younger. And then I think there's a humility to it, and a joy that can come from always coming back to, oh, how do I feel? Where's my body at? That even if I've had, small injuries or whatnot, coming back to dance is always such I find to me ultimately a celebration of life, regardless of the athleticism that it requires or not. I think just listening to a song and it really is just pure feeling. Without, you can close your eyes and move and that's I think it's a reason why we all love dance.
Freeing, kind of.
Yeah. Freeing in the sense of not I can do whatever I want, but freeing in the sense I can truly be with myself. To the point where sometimes words can't express. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you. So, did you bring any show and tell?
Oh, so I was thinking, I have, oh wait, I think it's on here. Oh, actually, this is a pretty long, it's a pretty long passage, and it's, let me remember where it's from. I think it's, where is it? I gotta remember. I have it here, but it's about, maybe, I don't know if it's about a 5 minute, maybe it's like a 2 minute read.
Okay.
It's a passage that I've kept with me for over the years. It's by William Saroyan.
Okay.
And should I just read it?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, no, go for it.
Okay. So he says, in the time of your life, live, so that in that good time there shall be no ugliness or death for yourself or for any life your life touches. Seek goodness everywhere, and when it is found, bring it out of its hiding place and let it be free and unashamed. Place in matter and in flesh the least of the values, for these are the things that hold death and must pass away. Discover in all things that which shines and is beyond corruption. Encourage virtue in whatever heart it may have been driven into secrecy and sorrow by the shame and terror of the world. Ignore the obvious, for it is unworthy of the clear eye and the kindly heart. Be the inferior of no man, or of any man be superior. Remember that every man is a variation of yourself. No man's guilt is not yours, nor is any man's innocence a thing apart. Despise evil and ungodliness, but not men of ungodliness or evil. These understand. Have no shame in being kindly and gentle, but if the time comes in the time of your life to kill, kill and have no regret. In the time of your life, live, so that in that wondrous time you shall not add to the misery and sorrow of the world, but shall smile to the infinite delight and mystery of it.
Hmm. That is lovely.
Yeah, it's I'm I'm a big fan of philosophy and poetry,
Hmm.
and I think this passage really speaks to a lot of values that I aspire towards.
Hmm. Would you do me a favor and send me that after?
Yeah, actually, do you want to? Yeah, I can send you a link to it right
Okay,
now.
thank you. Well, we're coming up on time, so usually at the end I do a little lightning round, which is just something sort of fun and a little goofy. Now you mentioned that you do swim in the Dungeons and Dragons waters a little bit. Is
Did
that
I?
right? Did you? No?
No, because I mean,
No.
it's the role play game,
Ah,
correct?
yes, 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 yes. Okay.
No,
No? Oh,
I've never
wow.
actually dove into it, and it's
Okay.
on your.
Okay.
Um,
So here's
yeah,
what,
yeah.
all right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a different game. Um, I am going to present to you a series of situations,
Okay.
and you have to choose which Fort Salem character you would rather have with you in those
Oh
situations.
my God. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
All right. Here we go. Dinner at Buckingham Palace.
Dinner at Buckingham Palace. I would go with Tally.
Okay. Trapped on a deserted island.
Abigail.
Mhm. At a table in a boardroom full of lawyers.
Uh, Alder.
Excellent choice. Okay. Time travel nonsense. Thrown back in time to a town in the Old West.
Old West. I would go with. Oh, what's? Oh my God, I forgot the character names. Uh, Amalia. What is her character?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Scylla. Right.
Scylla. Yeah,
Yeah.
Scylla.
Okay. Now on the line, you're a line cook in a high pressure French kitchen. Who's next to you?
Oh, Nikta.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. In a prison riot.
The prison riot.
Hmm.
I want to be with my little sister Kylie. And what's her name? I'm forgetting all the characters' names. It's been too long. Sorry. Uh, what's her name? Kylie? The girl who plays my little sister? What's her character name again? Kalita. I want to be
Kalita.
Kalita.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's okay. Listen, I'm doing just this badly. I was close. I'm like, it starts with a K.
Yeah. I want to be with Kalita in the
Yeah,
prison
yeah,
riot
yeah,
because nobody will
yeah,
mess with
yeah,
her.
yeah, totally. Okay. High stakes blackjack table.
Ooh, I think it's blackjack table. Demetria. Oh, Anacostia.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
Mhm.
All right. Cool, 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 cool. All right, so I'm going to do a quick sign off, and I just want to talk to you about something for a sec. But
Yep.
all right, so that is our show, you beautiful nerds. Thank you for listening. Check out the links in the description to follow Tony's Insta and keep up with all the amazing things that he's up to. If you haven't watched Motherland Fort Salem, what are you even doing with your life? All 3 seasons are on Hulu. As ever, the Geek Girls have the goodies for you. So for best results, insert in brain. Take care. Take it easy. and stay geeky.